that some of the mistakes have in my paintings are usually, not even just often, but usually my favorite parts of the painting. Hi, I'm Angela Fair. All through World Watercolor Month, we've been transforming how we learn to paint in watercolor with an emphasis on a heart-led approach, rather than something that's structured and rule-based and feels like school. With this idea of painting from the heart, we've done a lot of very intuitive water and paint plays, things that often result in abstract painting. And maybe you're thinking, I'm not interested in abstracts, I want to paint real things, I want to paint landscapes or florals or portraits, so a heart-led approach just isn't for me. And you couldn't be further from the truth. Heart-led painting is really for every artist who really wants to express themselves, their inner voice, and show who they are to the world. When you're choosing a heart-led approach to paint representational subjects, it means you get to invite yourself into the painting rather than just trying to copy what you see. There's this delicate balance that we walk between rendering exactly what we see and painting more intuitively and ending up with something that's completely shapeless. And we have to call it an abstract because no one can tell what it is. We want to find our happy medium, and that is individual to each artist. Personally, I've developed a heart-led painting style for the landscapes I love. Here in northern British Columbia, we get to see some of the most beautiful country in the world. We get off the highway, we go out into the backcountry, we experience nature and wilderness in a way that's just wonderful. It makes me so thankful to live here despite our long winters. So today I'm going to show you how I paint a local waterfall scene. If you've been wanting to learn how to paint waterfalls or water subjects, if you're wanting to understand how to simplify your landscape to make a stronger focal point, if you're just learning to paint and you want to paint real stuff, we're going to be covering how to do that in this video lesson. It's going to be fun. We're going to get this scene painted in just around 20 minutes. It doesn't take really long, which means you get to do it more than once. Every time you paint a scene and repeat that scene, you get better at rendering it your way, you become more confident, and so it's really worthwhile to take the time to paint and repaint your subject as you really get to know it from the inside out. As we're getting started, remember that this is just one of many lessons I offer here on YouTube and just one of my heart-led beginner lessons. I have the playlist for all of the free lessons from World Watercolor Month in the description below the video, a link to supplies we're using, and something else. Oh yeah, a link to the entire course. This is actually a complete course on my learn.angelafair.com website. We get even more in depth than what the lessons present here and really help you to get well on your way to mastering watercolor and painting to express yourself. It is really the most satisfying way to paint, and I want everyone to know that feeling. So let's get started painting. We're going to take a look at the reference photo and also a painting that's inspired this smaller version, and then we'll start painting. On the screen before you, you see two different images. One is the reference photo that I'm using in the lesson today, and there's a lot of detail in this reference photo. We want to simplify it down. And one way we do that is by getting a step back from the original reference photo. To do that, we can rely on a thumbnail sketch or a value study. You can paint some little exploratory work to help guide you. Or in my case, I'm choosing to paint inspired by this painting rather than by the reference photo itself. This painting came from this reference photo. I made some decisions to edit out different content that I didn't want to put in the painting. I simplified some areas. I chose colors that I loved. And this version is going to be yet another departure, simplifying it down to paint as a smaller size and with a more beginner audience in mind. You can download the reference photo in the description below the video. One way to make waterfalls work is really to focus on one focal point. We're going to paint with an emphasis on our waterfalls. That means everything else is going to be highly simplified. We're going to start out just by getting down the rock faces on either side of the waterfall. And so I'm envisioning my waterfall using the side of my brush to just put some green down to suggest trees, symbolize some trees here. I'll swoop up a little bit to give them some spiky looks as well. And then from there, we're going to mix up a little bit of a neutral color. And the best way to mix a neutral is to go a little crazy with your color mixing. I'm going to use my phthalo blue and my quinacridone rose and my quinacridone gold to make a muddy mess. I want it a little bit reddish, I think. I'm just going to keep adding color till I get kind of a neutral that I like, and that's going to be my grayish rock color. And I'm going to use that to place some rock on either side of my waterfall. So here on this side, I've placed some rocks, and I'm just going to soften a little bit here. Down below at the bottom, I have some beach actually showing up. So I'm going to add a little more. I'm just going to tweak this color slightly so that I get a slightly different color so that I can create a beach kind of land mass that looks separate from the bluish gray of my rocks. And then on this side, this rocky area kind of is mist that fades into water. So we're going to soften that and let some of our rock color flow into our landscape with some horizontal line. Now we're going to move over to this side and we're going to paint some more rocks on that side with a gap in between to show our waterfalls. And don't feel stressed if this takes you more than one try to get a version you like in your painting. I'm just going back and forth between green and red right now. Because I've done this, painted these waterfalls at least half a dozen times, if not more. I have a wealth of knowledge to work from that you're not going to have. I've painted this multiple times and I've developed some strategies that I know will work. So you're working from trial and error. While you have a video tutorial to teach you, that doesn't mean you're going to get it right the first time. Be willing to paint this more than once. By using the green apatite and the quinacridone rose mostly, and just a tiny dab of the blue, I've created kind of a brownish mixture that's really nice for a warmer shade of rocks here. And I really like it. The green apatite has a bit of granulation that looks like texture on the rocks. And now as I move down below, we have a lot of mist coming up from the water. So again, I'm going to soften and let that color flow and keep my lines crisper on this side. When you're placing those rock colors, you might decide you want to go a little bit darker, mixing more neutrals again. I can place a little bit of darker value color just in a few areas to create some variation of light and dark. And I'm also going to create a lost and found edge just with a damp brush to let a little bit of that rock color bleed into my water. Now, if you're letting color bleed into an area that you'd like to stay mostly white, it might want to take over, and that's where you want to have a little paper towel on hand and just keep it under control. And if your paper is quite dry already, then you're going to see maybe less bleeding than what you'd like, and then you have to develop a new strategy. Now I've added one new color to my palette for this painting, and that is this verditer blue. Now in my reference photo, I have trees, actually burned out dead trees coming up here. And then of course I haven't painted any sky. And in my reference photo, I actually don't see a lot of blue sky. The sky on that day was kind of whitish. And a lot of artists will paint that sky and any background elements first. And maybe I should have done that. There's always more than one way to paint a scene. Never feel like there's only one right way to do it. How I paint something depends very much on the reference photo and on my mood and my approach, what I want to emphasize in the painting. So at this time, I'm going to place some sky just with the verditer blue. It's a really pretty warm blue, and I like the way it flows in a sky. And I'm varying the intensity of it, so in some places it's fairly light and looks a little cloudy. And I think we're going to just go right up to the edge of that rocky tree, rocky hill area. And then I think I'm debating whether or not how much I want to add for trees there. Let's just see if we can't make kind of a grayish, greenish brown to paint some distant trees with the side of the brush, keeping distant elements simple, because this is a single focal point image. This is a painting where we want the viewer to go straight to the waterfall, and everything else is just here to kind of support it. So we're going to move this grayish green color right across the painting. And in some places it's actually flowing softly into the sky, and that really helps emphasize that feeling of distance and unimportance, saying, you know, everything's soft here, you don't have to spend a lot of time looking at it. We're giving visual cues to help the viewer understand the painting. And I'm going to use straight up green apatite right now, apatite, I don't know, I never pronounce it right, I think, to just flick up some trees with a light touch on my brush. And again, keeping the trees simple helps remind the viewer that they can look at that stuff, but they don't have to stay there. We want them to keep going back to the waterfall, which at this point is just a big white mass. So now we have some trees there, and right now actually the eye goes pretty straight to those trees. It's a beautiful, strong, vibrant color. And so there's a lot to look at there that's nice. We also have some really pretty colors happening in this area, and some interesting watermarks over here. We're getting beautiful colors over here, not just because of the green apatite, which does granulate and create some textural areas. It's got a beautiful coppery undertone, but just because we mixed our neutral by using multiple colors rather than going to a tube of gray paint, we were able to make our rock color that much more interesting because it's made up of 3 different colors that retain a little bit of their own identity, especially in a wet wash where they have a little time to separate as they dry, and that can create some really beautiful effects. Now, because I'm mostly done painting rocks here, I might come back and put some darker values down at the bottom of the painting, but for now I'm going to clear a space to mix and work with blues for our water. Because the waterfall is the star of the show, we want to work carefully and intentionally to place the colors that will make our waterfall look pretty. Now here's the deal with water. Water has so many different characteristics that learning how to paint water is really just a matter of having really good observation skills. Look for the light and dark values. The areas where the water looks white is where there's a lot of action, a lot of foam and movement in the water means that it's churning, it looks white there. In other areas where it's moving a little more slowly, or maybe there's a shallower depth of water, we're going to see some of the rock showing through. We might see some of the sky reflected in our water, giving it a blue tinge. And those are things we want to depict in our painting while not losing the whites, which are what depicts movement in the scene. Additionally, we want to be thinking about our contrasts. If I put all the shadowy darks, dark blues and turquoises of the water in right near the other areas that are dark by my rocks, I'm not going to have the strong contrast that really evoke power. So we're going to start just mixing a little phthalo blue over here, and it's instantly probably too bright, so we're going to dilute it. And we're also going to add just a tinge of yellow to give it kind of a turquoise hue. Oh, there we go. We're getting a nice turquoise. And I'm not going to be afraid to add a little more yellow than maybe I think I can get away with. If it gets to be too green looking, then I just grab a little more phthalo blue. It's that back and forth dance of getting the color right. And I'm going to try to leave this area here white for now and put a little passage of turquoise kind of right down the center of the painting. And I'm painting it as a line, but then I'm immediately taking a damp brush and softening some of it. Not all of it, because we want to have, again, contrasts that suggest movement. And I'm blotting my brush so it's not too wet. If I'm adding a lot of water, then it's going to be really hard to control how that paint moves. So I want to work with, and this is a small piece of paper. If you really want to explore water and have a lot of time to do it, you might think about working out this painting in a larger format. Trying a bigger version could really help you really get detailed in the amount of colors you use and the contrast and so forth. And look at how already we see this movement now of water coming down. It's no longer a white space, but by curving, I went fairly horizontal with my aqua right here. Put a little bit more blue up there. And then and I think I'll put a little more blue even up here, because this is the area where the water's kind of flat before it cascades down, and it might just be reflecting more of the light from the sky than down in this area. So lots of little patterns of color there. And then moving, right away we take this abrupt turn and we start pulling color downwards into the lower part of the waterfall. And showing vertical movement, it's the same if you're trying to paint a hill or a road going downwards or upwards. It's all in perspective and getting those angles right, knowing when to shift from horizontal line to vertical or any angle in between. And I'm going to actually go with quite a lot of aqua at the base of my waterfall and a little stronger dilution. And in this area, for example, we have water that's in the shadow of this cliff. So we're going to paint that fairly dark. And we have lots of, notice I'm again moving horizontally. This is to depict that flat place at the bottom of the waterfall. It's giving the viewer that visual cue that helps them know that the water has landed. And this is now the lake underneath. A little bit of pure phthalo blue gives some beautiful rich depths. This is all shadow, so there should be less white water and reflection there. Yeah, that's kind of pretty. And I'm going to soften along here so we can't tell really where the shadows blur into the rocks. And I'll emphasize that more in a upcoming stage here. Now, I pull back for a second, I don't rush, and I take a look and see what else I can add. I don't want to overwork this. I would rather show some restraint and pay attention to what is happening on the paper, evaluate the movement of the water, and refer back to my reference photo to see what I'm missing. If there's an area that doesn't seem like it's working, by pausing, I'm better able to analyze that and plan. Now I think we need a little bit of color in here, but I don't want to do too much. Again, I want to keep that white water white, but a little bit of line. Again, moving downwards, downward strokes on this side. Keeps that movement happening. Blotting my brush so I don't have too much water on it, so that I can now soften edges and kind of blur a few things together. Now I am going to go quickly and try to mix a little bit of my shadow color again. This is where you might want to have a plate on hand to do extra mixing if you're working with a small palette like I am. And need more blue, I think. Trying to get fairly close to that original gray that I started with. That's why it's nice to not have to clean your palette halfway through a painting. I'm going to touch in a little bit of that shadow color, connecting those two areas, and I'm going to build up my shadows. I need even more color here. And now it got really powerful, taking over. Oh, it's so pretty. Yeah, that should work. And I'm going to let that blur down into the water down here. Like I mentioned, I want that to look almost seamless. Blur between shadow and cliff. I want the rocks to look nice and crisp and contrasted. These rocks are in front of the waterfall, so they really shouldn't have, they should have a nice crisp barrier between them and the water, because the water might be splashing on them a little bit, but not enough to obscure, I think, the shape of the cliff. Whereas on this side we see more of the spray kind of misting over towards the waterfall or the rocks. And I'm increasing darkening my values right now, and by increasing the contrast, making a stronger contrast between dark and light, we really see those waterfalls just pop into sharp focus. They become so powerful when the contrasts are powerful too. And so it takes a bit of fearlessness to be able to create those contrasts without kind of chickening out and softening and lightening them. And that's okay. Again, paint this more than once so you really get to know the scene and get a feel for your own strategies for making the painting have the impact that you want. Now, I could stop right now. I actually see a lot of things that are working really well. But I think right now I just want to go to a little bit smaller brush and add a few little next level details. So I've mixed up a little more of the yellow with the phthalo blue. I really like that greenish hue. And I think by going quite green, I should be able to actually make some really pretty little marks just to make the colors even richer and prettier in my waterfall. And by having really beautiful colors in my waterfall, that can actually help distract from any areas of my painting that might not be working so good away from the water. So sometimes it's not always about painting everything perfectly, but about getting the viewer's attention so that they aren't drawn to areas that you're not so happy about. I always thought that I would know success as an artist when I painted a perfect painting, and I can tell you that after 25 years in watercolor, that has never happened yet. And in fact, it has become the case that some of the mistakes in my paintings are usually, not even just often, but usually my favorite parts of the painting. Becoming a painter who is not threatened by mistakes, but uses them as an opportunity to look for the unexpected and to make the painting something different and better than you thought you could make on your own. I think if we always worked right to our expectations, we would actually fall short of all that we could achieve as artists. And so I like to think that I'm being a good boss to my watercolor by give it some direction, give that, place that paint, let it flow, and then, kind of sit back and let it do its thing. Not panic just because it started to take off in a slightly different direction than I thought it was going to. Oh, see, and that phthalo blue went down darker than I thought it was going to. And I don't have to immediately panic and dab it off. I can actually use that to create some areas of strong contrast in the middle of the waterfall that will bring the viewer right up to that part of the painting. Their eye is actually going to go from all of those dark, beautiful spots. This little dark passage that I'm placing right now is going to bring their eye down toward this little dark passage. And then their eye will go down to this dark passage and then into these areas down here. And then, ideally, this water connects with this beautiful shape of shadow, and so the eye comes up to these trees, and then it completes that circuit all over again. And that's really a fun thing to do, is to kind of plot and notice and observe how your viewer is going to travel through your painting. Now, I said I was going to do a little bit with the foreground here. It's a little bit of this pale, bland nothing. There's actually, in my reference photo, there's some fallen logs. So we're just going to crisscross it with a few marks there that will suggest those logs. A little bit of Quinn Gold. And a little bit of that color creeping into the water will suggest shoreline. And it's kind of not great, but that's okay. We're going to sign our name over there, and then we'll call it done. Or you can crop it out when you frame the painting. you've got lots of options. Now, one more thing I should mention, I always do this evaluation. We've actually finished. I don't need to do much more. I don't want to overwork my water by spending a lot of time fussing with getting the exact depth of values correct to my reference photo. What matters more than whether or not this matches the reference photo is whether it works as a whole. So I look for that instead. One thing that might be something I could do, and I'm not going to do it, is darkening up those distant trees. They've really faded as they've dried and are very soft and pale. I might be thinking, nitpicking, that I want to go a little bit darker there. The problem with that is that if I go too dark, then they blend too much with these trees and they have less impact. So there's like this chain reaction that happens that you might not want to encourage. So sometimes, you know, nitpicking about stuff like that can actually lead to this whole snowball effect that can ruin a painting and make it feel forced and overworked. So you're much better off, you know, looking for your focal point, just softening a line here, looking for your focal point, saying, okay, where's my focal point? How does the viewer move through the painting? Is that satisfactory? You know, is the viewer actually going to be distracted by the areas that I'm fussing over? And if the answer is no, they're going to be looking at the beautiful stuff that's happening in the focal point. You can let the rest of everything else go and just enjoy a successful painting. I really hope you're doing more than just watching the video. I hope that you intend to pull out your painting stuff and paint this yourself. There's a little sense of procrastination sometimes that happens when we fall into YouTube. We see all these great tutorials and somehow our time just trickles away until we have no time left to paint. So drop everything, grab your painting supplies. You don't need a lot to complete this lesson, and spend 20 minutes painting along with me here. I'd love to see what you're creating. Post it on social media with the hashtag Angela Fair or Angela Fair Tutorials. Add the hashtag World Watercolor Month, because this is a companion lesson to our World Watercolor Month celebration, celebrating watercolor through the month of July. And that's just been so much fun. I hope you're entering the draws on doodlewash.com and donating to our charitable partner, the Dreaming Zebra Foundation. Don't forget that any course purchase you're making on my website at learn.angelafair.com, I'm sending 10% to Dreaming Zebra for any course purchased during the month of July. I love being able to send them a big check at the end of the month, so I hope you'll help me do that. And thank you again for watching. Leave a comment. Let me know what you'd like to see me paint next month. We're going to be focusing on plein air or on location painting, and I'd love to have you join us for that as well. Bye for now.